Welcome everybody to CrowdStack Snacks, and today I have a special treat. We are talking to Rich Millington of Feverbee, and he is one of the originals, author of one of the best original, you can see my dog-eared copy with notes in it,
Wow.
etc., buzzing communities. It's definitely one of my favorite reference books for our online community, but guess what? We're about to get a new one, and so we're going to grill Rich today about what's coming up. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us today, Rich. Just wondering, what's the new book going to be about, and what's your time frame for releasing that?
Sure. Well, it's going to be about online communities for sure. That's kind of my shtick in this field. The book is going to be narrow. It's going to be about how you do communities better. I think at the moment, there's such this incredible energy behind online communities, and we're looking at the bigger and bigger scope of what communities could be. We're looking at how it can integrate with all the different parts of the business. We're thinking about all these really important, amazing things. But what I don't think we're spending enough time on is how we build communities better at the really micro level, at the really minutia level. That's what this book is about. It's going to get very deep into the weeds of building a community, all the way through to that very depth of what do you tell members? What words should you use? What words should you not use? What kind of content works best in different kinds of communities? Getting really, really deep and understanding how we can build communities a lot better than what we do today.
That sounds really intriguing to me, and I'm always ready to go into the weeds, so I'm excited about that. Is, is there something about what's going on right now in the community industry that made you feel now is the right time to talk about kind of the practicalities and the details of building a community versus going more high-level strategic?
I think there's such an incredibly important role for the strategic side, the visionary side. And I think there's people that do that incredibly well, and they talk about and they advocate for this in this industry on a level that I'm just not able or have the ability to do. I think what's happening now in client after client that we work with is that we might be recruited to try and resolve an issue that a community is facing, or get a new community off the ground, or to just improve a very large, mature existing community. And what happens is that they always want to do the big thing, the really big thing. They want to move to a new platform, or they want to launch a new gamification program, or host a big event. And what we've found time and time again is that you don't need to do many of these things. A lot of the time, if you just do the basics a lot better, if you just understand how do you engage people, when people first join a community on their very first day, on their very first visit, what do they need to see to get them engaged? And if you look at a lot of the literature and the discussions happening in the community space, they don't tend to go at that depth. But I think it's at that depth that really interesting things happen, where we have spent so much time split testing different possibilities, different messages. We have spent so much time looking at the data behind some of the best online communities that are out there today, and figure out what do these communities with the highest retention rates or the most engaged audiences, what do they do differently from all of the other communities that are out there today? And so I think there's a lot of really fantastic things going on in the community space and the industry and all the fragmentations of that industry. But for me, what's really, really exciting is understanding when you get really deep in the weeds, when you look at the types of content that work best and how that's structured and how it's delivered and how it's engaged to audiences. When you look at how events are hosted and how people are invited to join them, how they participate, amazing things happen. And I've absolutely lost track of the number of times we've been able to make really being able to make suggestions that sound really simple and really obvious, but they work extremely well. And what we've been very lucky to do, I think, is look at this big data set of online communities, and we shared some of that data in the past, but this big data set, look at what all these communities are doing, identify where the outliers are and learn from them, really understand what they're doing differently, what they need to do. And if you're working in this field today, it's quite likely that you drifted into it from another field. Very few people go to a community management school, like there's training courses. We do some, I think a lot of other people do courses as well, but a lot of people just drifted into it. And I think if you get a grounding on doing this kind of stuff, this kind of activities really, really well, everything else becomes a lot easier. Your success rate multiplies every single day if you understand how to do the basics a lot better.
100%. One of the things I appreciate the most about your blog, the Fever Bee blog, is that you have this great way of crystallizing these tiny little shifts that you can make, these little insights that you can apply. A lot of times I will save a blog post for like, oh, I need to go do that later, or try that out. And over the years, I've just gotten so many great little nuggets of wisdom from the blog. So
Thank you.
I think it'll be cool to have a book that, you know, kind of touches on some of those things. And, you know, another thing I really appreciate from your site is in the last year, you put together this huge resource based on that data set that you talk about. You know, you've talked to so many clients and really helped so many different scenarios and watched it really in action in the trenches. Can you give us a little sneak peek, 2 or 3 kind of major overarching things that you've seen for the successful ones, the good ones?
It's funny when you put together a list of your favorite or top online communities, I never really appreciated how controversial that would become. I guess it was kind of obvious that people have opinions, and I guess it's kind of like putting the opinion, like the work of community consultants in a list and saying who's the best. Obviously, I'd have strong opinions about that.
Where's my community?
So again, Exactly. I apologize to anyone who I left out. You know, it's subjective. It's just my opinion. But that said, there's certain criteria that I look at. Definitely, you need, you know, a decent level of activity. I think if you've got, you know, 10 members, that's fantastic, but it's probably not going to be on the list. So there are a couple of things specifically that I was looking at. One is a community that seems to have transcended its initial purpose. A lot of communities are based around, say, just customer support or just around driving a lot of engagement. But if you look at some of the communities I really like Atlassian and Alteryx and Fitbit, you'll find that, yes, they do customer support, but they also do all these other things as well. They do ideation, they do user groups, they do in-app communities, they do knowledge sharing, they do all these amazing things. It's not just that they do it, but they seem to be doing each of these extremely well. And there's lots of platforms that can give you all of the features to do all these things. Launching a feature isn't that difficult, but pulling it off at a really advanced level, so there's high levels of activity, engagement, participation, that is definitely a really important part of it. So I was looking at the kinds of communities that would have the best value, in my perception, to the organization. The other thing I was looking at is, are they doing the basics well? So we were scraping data, analyzing it, and looking at things like average time to first response, accepted solution rates, a whole range of different things. What else are there? Sentiment scores, if we had access to that, number of new registrations a day, retention rates, and trying to get a rough idea of which of these communities are really doing well at that level. And whilst that's not applicable to every kind of community, definitely to a large number, you get a very good sense of what they're doing well and what they're not. And what I found is that the communities that are doing well tend to invest a lot in training their staff to do those things well. There aren't many thriving online communities around today, at least at that level, where their staff aren't really, really good at doing these things well. And so they have the processes, even at the moderation level, they understand what kind of things they're looking out for. They understand how to greet someone into a community. They understand how to keep someone engaged. They have the design of the community that reflects the purpose. And so they do all of those things really, really well. And so again, it's just my list. Other people had their own lists and awards and all that kind of things. But I think those are the kind of things I look out for, like the vision and whether they're doing the basics well, and just the overall vibe of that community. Do members seem to be positive towards the brand as well?
Yeah, I think the training component and continuing education is really important. I see that a lot, and that, you know, brands who think they can just assign an intern to to watch the community, that's just not going to end up thriving. And so kind of the more human power you could put into it over the long term,
Absolutely.
the more value you'll get out of it, I think. And the more the members will get out of it too, more importantly. So shifting gears a little bit, talking about the big brands and the big successful communities, I think something that's going on right now, something in the water, is this whole idea of the creator economy, niche communities, small communities, micro communities. I'm not sure we've settled on a term yet, but basically, maybe it's not owned by a brand. It's someone who has a YouTube channel or a podcaster or something else, and they want to set up a community. Do you see a connection there in terms of the principles and the basics that we've been applying to these big brand communities that the smaller communities can also apply? Or do you think that's a whole different discipline and we need a whole new set of rules?
Let me tackle that question from a slightly different perspective, because I think
Go for it.
when we talk about building a community, I think in the industry, we're not always talking about the same thing. And I think what we're seeing is a kind of fragmentation of different communities. So I think at one level, we've got the customer support communities. A lot of brands, you go there, you ask a question, you get an answer, and then you leave and you don't come back unless there's another question to ask. Then you have more of the engagement or the retention-based communities where you want people to be engaged, share knowledge, share expertise, where it's more about the passion or their interest in the topic. Then you have the communities that are more about knowledge management, employees, and how you keep those people engaged and sharing documentation and tagging it in exactly the right way. So I think what we're seeing is a fragmentation. And I think that fragmentation is going to get bigger and bigger. And I think even now, if you look at the community industry as it is, it's not going to be one industry for much longer. I think it's just fragmenting out a little bit too far, where the same rules that apply to one type of community simply don't apply to another. For most customer support communities, if we're honest, there's a certain numbers game about it, where if you've got 10,000 people that are asking questions a day, it doesn't matter what you do. If you give them another place to ask those questions, they're going to go to that community to go there and ask questions. So it's more about how you handle that and what you do with that. And there's a lot of nuance behind that, but fundamentally that's part of the case. But then you have those communities where people are launching it around a passion or a community of practice for people to share their knowledge and expertise and talk about those things. And that's where I think that the overlap is particularly strong. I think if you're building a new community from scratch today, there's certain principles that apply to those kinds of communities also apply to you. Where first you need to have some existing connections within that space. There's people that need to know you and trust you. Otherwise, who's going to go to the party of someone that they don't know? Or maybe some people do, but I personally would be a little bit hesitant to do that. Who's going to give up their time to help build a community for someone that they don't know? So building up those connections, really deeply understanding what members want today, what kinds of discussions or questions do they have that they want answered, what kinds of people do they want to connect with, what level of privacy do they want. Even just before this call, I'm on a member interview for another client where we're going to be launching a small community in a very technical field. And again, this is like maybe the 15th interview for this one client I'm doing of a member of the members, and you learn so much from every interview about what their needs are, what challenges are, what they want to resolve, and most importantly, who can help them resolve those challenges. And once you have those answers to those questions, once you've done the research at that depth, then it becomes a lot easier to begin stitching together a community. You kind of get a sense of what kind of technology to use, probably something quite simple. You kind of get a sense of who you want to invite to begin with. You kind of get a sense of what kind of questions to initiate. And so those kind of principles very much do apply. And so I think there's a huge opportunity today for everyone to wake up and realize that they've been building communities all along, but they haven't realized it. If you're running a WhatsApp group for friends, it doesn't sound like you've been building a community, but you probably have, just at a very more exclusive and private level. And there's so many skills that apply if you're doing it well. And one of the things I wrestled with my publisher with a little bit for this book, if you don't mind the additional plug here, I didn't want this just to be a book for businesses building community today. I very much wanted it to be for anyone building any kind of online group to help them have the skills and knowledge and expertise that they need to get their communities off the ground. So I think the answer to your question is yes. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I think there's a lot of overlap between a certain kind of community. And I think really understanding who your members are and what they need and what they are scared of and their desires, I think that's the secret. And if you can get to the bottom of that, building a community becomes relatively simple, I think.
Yeah, it should be simple. It should be fun. One of the things I'm crusading
Yes,
about
it
right
should be
now, like
fun.
we need to put the fun back in communities. We need to be able to nerd out about Star
Ah, I
Wars
miss
or
fun.
whatever. Let's do that. But I love what you're saying because it is not all about the big brands, and even a big brand might have a one-off need for just a very simple, quick tool that's they're going to shut down after an event. It doesn't all have to be about we want a million member, 500,000 page views a day, like this big monster. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. So for all those people who have been accidentally building communities, which I love that, that's so true. Sometimes we get to inside baseball in the industry of here's what we call it, here's what it is, arguing about what
Yeah.
is and isn't. I think some of that isn't as important as, get your group together and do your thing. It really at its core, it should be simple and fun. And because we're talking about people, right?
Yeah. And there's so many lessons here. It's like it's such a useful skill for anything you want to do. I remember I was about to go into it was a meeting with a senior executive of a client where we were going to be presenting some of the ideas and the strategy for the community. And one of the things we hadn't realized is that one of the senior people hadn't been involved in the interviews that we had done. And instead of presenting the strategy to this person, we used this as an opportunity to get their input, get their feedback, and make sure that was embedded to what we presented at a later date. And I think that's kind of a community approach as well, where instead of telling people, instead of trying to take this top-down approach of building community for a group of people, that you build it with them and get their opinions and input the entire way through. And I think that's maybe the core skill of building a community, right? Is being able to gather that input, identify what people need, and also identify what resources and skills and assets they can contribute to that community as well. And I think once you make every single person feel like they can make a unique, useful contribution to a group, they do it. And the challenge always, I think, is how do you figure out what is that unique thing that every single person can contribute to that group? Even if it's their first day in the topic, they know what questions someone on their very first day has. And those are interesting questions because it's going to help the next person that comes after them. So I think that's the approach. I think that's the discipline and the skill to master. And I think that's what I wish and I hope that we spend more time just thinking about. Big programs are great, but the skills at the one-to-one level, I think they are critically important as well.
So true. We're getting close to the end of our time. I wanted to ask you kind of one big headline question is, as someone who is an industry expert, well respected, what do you see? Don't laugh. um, what do you see as coming in our future? What do you think is next for online communities, groups? Where do you think we're going right now?
I have no idea. That'd be the honest way. I think everyone makes predictions, and then a year later, they make another set of predictions without ever looking back at what they said the last year. I think there's a couple of trends that are interesting. I don't know how it's all going to play out. I think the trends of data privacy and security is going to make community building more difficult. I've seen that with clients. It's good for the member. I think there's social trends that are going to be very challenging and it's going to affect moderation in a really big way. And I think we're going to have to be more, I think we're going to have to start picking sides more than what we wanted to, or getting involved in discussions and debates that maybe we didn't initially want to. And I think there's still always that challenge of establishing the value of community. It feels like right now there's a lot of momentum behind community building, but at the same time, it's not absolute. I can name many people who have lost their jobs in the last year, and community programs that are being scaled down and cut back. So I think establishing that value is quite important as well. So as an industry, I expect us to just be a little bit more fragmented in the future, but I think there's some core trends that are driving a lot of things right now, and I don't know how it's going to play out yet.
I agree, and I don't know where it's going either. But I do agree that like the tent is getting bigger. The people included under the umbrella of our industry is getting bigger, more diverse, more interesting. Like I'm kind of excited to see where we go.
Absolutely, same.
So in closing, I would love a teaser of, do you have anything you can share about when the book will be available, where we can get it? Can you share the title?
Sure. The book is called Build Your Community. It should be available at the beginning of May. And I can send through all the details after this, and you can link to it and all those great things. And I'm happy to share like a free chapter with your audience as well, if that helps.
That would be awesome. We'd love that. Thank you.
Thank you
Well,
so much for having me.
thank you very much, Rich. And everybody, make sure you go out and grab that book as soon as you can get your hot little hands on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.